So the most important and sometimes overlooked element of video production is audio. Nothing will make somebody run faster from a video than poor sound. And I know it sounds crazy, but it will even let people kind of overlook a little bit glitchy production or poor production if the audio sounds good. Now, I like to record to an external source like a Zoom H4n that you see here. Zoom makes a lot of really great products. There are also other makers of really great audio recorders, but Zoom is what I've been using for a really long time. Now, this allows you to have multiple inputs on XLR. XLR is this big input as opposed to a small little 1/8 inch here. That's just an adapter you can plug right in. And I like to lapel mic, as you can see, all of my guests on our video podcasts that we shoot. Granted, it's not the most visually pleasing, but it is 100% the most glitch-free way to get really good sounding audio from somebody's voice. There are other ways to do it, such as boom microphones, which means that you have a microphone that comes up and over and is out of frame. So anytime you see like the outtakes of a video, sometimes you'll see like the fuzzy thing popping in the frame and people are laughing and being great or whatever. That's called a boom mic. And basically what that means is it's catching audio from above the source, but it's out of frame so you don't see it. For a video podcast setup where you have multiple people, you would need 2 boom mics and they would have to be directed at the person who is speaking. Those are pretty much the 2 ways that you would be able to get good audio without it sounding like you're in a tinny room, because if you get a lot of echo, that probably means that you're not close enough to the source or that the room has a lot of really hard surfaces that sound bounces off of. Another thing to really pay attention to when you're doing sound is the levels of the microphones that are on the individual people. So we use Sennheiser wireless lavaliers. They're expensive, they're about $700, $750 each set. You can also use wired lavaliers, which are fine as well, but you just wanna make sure that you do audio checks on everybody who's going to be on camera with headphones on that are not allowing you to hear them in the actual room. The reason for that is because if you're in headphones, you can hear what the viewer and or the listener is going to be hearing. So for instance, if we are using a different kind of mic on one person than on the other one, they may have different types of input. So for instance, if I use the Sennheiser wireless lavalier system and I use a plugged-in lav from another manufacturer, most of the time the Sennheiser microphone is a lot hotter or a lot louder is what we would call it. What I would have to do then is turn down the level on the Sennheiser to make sure it matches the level that whatever the other lavalier microphone is. You just want to make sure that when they're speaking, also sometimes people have louder voices than the other person on camera. So you just want to make sure that when it comes through on the headphones, that both volumes feel very, very similar so that one person doesn't sound louder than the other, or you don't get any, sometimes you'll hear things like, just in the headphones, if somebody's wearing a necklace, or if their mic's moving a lot, or if their hair is hitting it, like you can hear this. Anything that touches a microphone is really gonna cause a problem and you're going to hear it. So you 100% have to make sure that you're listening through headphones through the entirety of the video podcast, or that somebody is. If it's your podcast and you're shooting, it's tough to do that because that might look weird. But whoever's filming it needs to be monitoring sound, because the last thing you wanna happen is for your audio to cut out or for there to be a glitch or somebody's necklace hitting the mic, like my hand just did, and nobody's catching it until after the whole episode is filmed. Then you have to can the episode, or you just have to send out an episode of bad sound, and you just really want to make sure that you're avoiding anything like that. All right, now on to the second most important thing when it comes to video. And sometimes it can be debated that it is the most important, but for visuals, it definitely is. And that's lighting. The best cameras in the world can't get around horrible lighting. Even in scenes that you see in movies that are dark, they've been lit to look dark, and then they've been played with in post-production to make it look like it wasn't lit, but really, lights are used in everything professional that you've seen. It is the quickest way to get from amateur video to professional quality in just a matter of a couple $100 on Amazon. So you don't need crazy fancy expensive lights to get away with a really good look. Here's an example of some lights that we use that are from Amazon to keep a really small space lit really well for any kind of video podcast. Diffusing the light is going to be really important for people who aren't familiar with working with a lot of lighting. When you don't diffuse the light, you're going to get a lot of really hard shadows. And if you don't know what diffusing means, it basically means putting like a thin sheet or something in front of the light that kind of softens it so that you're not getting a harsh blast of light in your face. You're actually getting like a soft overall general lighting so that you can avoid really, really hard shadows. It also helps to avoid shadows that will come from behind you as well. So there are also a couple of different types of lights that you can purchase. One is a light with a softbox on it. So what that means is you'll have a regular, good old-fashioned bright light, and then it will have a big box around it with like a sheerish kind of white cover that goes in front of the bulb. And that diffuses the light so that instead of hitting you dead on or the subject dead on, it has to go through the diffusion to disperse a soft, even light. There are also LEDs, which is what we're using. They're honestly the easiest to use now. They're a lot less expensive than they used to be, and you can put little like slips or like scrims in them to diffuse the light as well. There are other elements about lighting that you really want to consider, and that's to make sure that whatever is behind the guest is lit to make sure that you don't get shadows on the wall. So another way to help with that is to push the furniture away from the wall a little bit so that they're not right up against it and you don't see really hard shadows. Another thing to consider is backlighting people, so their hair gets a nice little glow if you hit them with light from the back. You also may want to consider lighting any cool things that are within the shot, like props or anything fun that you want to make sure aren't dark and not noticeable. For more tips on lighting in general and how to do 3-point lighting, which works for pretty much any type of video, go ahead and hit the YouTube link below and you can get a more extensive view on how to make sure that you're getting your lighting to look really, really great. Last but not least, you need cameras, right? So we usually do a 3-camera setup when we're doing interview style video podcasts. The main camera will be a wide angle shot, which means that both people will be totally viewable in the frame. The other 2 cameras are going to be specifically for each individual. So while the main camera may be fairly easy to master, it's those individual shots that you have to be really careful that you follow a couple of rules. One quick tip for the main shot, you never want to come up at a subject. It makes it look like they're towering over you. You're going to want to make sure you come down just a little bit. Plus it also gives more flattering angles for, the double chin scenario. And it makes you look a little trimmer and a lot less like and intimidating. So just, if you can, default to just a little tiny bit coming down. Just like point the camera down at them just a little bit. So now for the individual cameras, there are 2 rules you need to make sure that you're following. One is the 180-degree rule, and the other one is the rule of thirds. So the 180-degree rule means that if the camera's on this side of everybody, you cannot cross this plane. So this is the 180-degree plane. Everything in this shot would need to go over here. So all cameras hitting me right now would have to go in front of me from this side to this side up front. Now you can shoot from all the way over here if you want. If that's a really cool angle, one nice thing to do whenever you're getting an over the shoulder shot is to get a little bit of the other person in that angle. I used to do those a lot with Mike in the GSD show. So you'll see the other person, only their shoulder or the side of their face or whatever in the very edge of the shot, but then you'll see the person who's talking clearly, and the majority of them will be on camera. Now you can also, what we've defaulted more to is coming in a little bit more. So you're not getting a whole lot of the over the shoulder shot. It's really tough to do that if you're in a studio setup because you get a lot of everything that's going on the sides. So when you have a smaller backdrop, that you are trying to avoid getting outside of the frame, you can always bring the cameras closer in, and then you would follow the rule of thirds. So what the rule of thirds means is that you want to divide your frame into thirds this way and thirds this way. So if I'm looking at the camera right now, so this would be thirds going up and down. So 1, 2, 3, right? And then this would be thirds going across. So this is not for the main shot. This is just for the individual shots. So for instance, you'll see here that Emily is the host and she's going to be on the left side. So we've used the rule of thirds here that her face is on the top left third. So now when you look at the guest that she's interviewing, you'll see that they're also playing the rule of thirds, but they're on the opposite side. So you're still showing that they're looking at each other and having a conversation, and it's the placement of where we put them on the thirds that makes it feel really natural to the viewer's eye. A couple of other quick tips about camera work is that you're going to want to make sure that your color balance is always the same on all 3 cameras. So you don't want one camera that has a little more of a blue hue and another one has a little more of an orange hue based on what kind of lighting you're using. So just make sure that your white balance, is exactly the same throughout all of them to avoid having to do a lot of adjusting in post-production. Also, there's this big thing about whether to shoot in 4K or not since it's so accessible. We shoot in 4K here and there. The nice thing about 4K is that you're able to manipulate it in post-production without getting a whole lot of damage to the file. That would result in a lot of graininess. You can see that the file has been worked on and you lose quality. With this type of shooting, you really shouldn't have to make a lot of adjustments in post-production if you've done everything in production as well as you could. Also, with 4K footage, you're not going to export it as 4K anyway because you're going to send it to the web. And let's be honest, most people are scrolling on their phone watching it anyway. So 4K does not matter on an iPhone, let's be honest. So I would suggest shooting in just HD. So what is nice about that is then you're not taking up massive file sizes on your memory cards, because if you're shooting in 4K, you're taking up more than twice the amount of space that you would if you were shooting in just HD. So those are the 3 most important technical tips on how to create a really great video podcast. Here's a couple other little small bonus tips. There's so much to really think about when you're creating a podcast, that really the technical stuff is one element, but you have to just make sure that you're creating like a great guest experience, that you're knowing what to do with your content afterwards. I mean, now you've shot it. So what are you gonna do with it now? How do you market it? How do you turn one massive piece of content into 15 different pieces of content that you can tease on the web and use as Facebook advertising and lead to other pieces of content and retargeting? You know, there's just a lot to really think about how to make the best out of your episodes. And I really hope that you do some research or reach out to us and see how you can get all of that information for you. But in the meantime, here's a couple of small tips that I think can be really helpful that sometimes you don't really think about. So the first one is props. Why wouldn't you have props on? I mean, it doesn't matter if you have a serious podcast or a silly podcast. Having something cool that's visually, matches your brand is a great idea. So here are some of the things that we've used. I personally love this doggy. I think he's adorable, and he would be on my video podcast. He's actually one of the VPP pieces of just fun stuff around the studio, but I think he's adorable. And if I were doing my own podcast right this second, look, he's on it right now, the VPP dog. We also, and if you have a more serious podcast, just small things like this, we would like, for us, we do video, so this is kind of cool to have just somewhere in frame. One of our clients is called Back Office Betties, and she wanted to have a really cool, fun vibe, kind of cheeky, and their logo is, a vintage cartoon looking Betty in a cute red dress and a red headband. The name of their podcast is Share the Love, like L-A-W-V-E, because they deal with law. So we decided to get them a happy little prop gift, and that is Lady Justice in the same outfit that their logo has. And it works for their brand because they are cheeky and, she's goofy and fun, but it may not work for all. But make sure that you have something. Like for the GSD show, Mike puts green apples because the logo is green. Just make sure that you're putting something visually dynamic in there. So those are just a few tips to get you started with creating a successful video podcast. Now, if you want to know more, because there's so much more to really think about, from pre-production to creating your branding for your new show, to the production to post-production, and how to create, lighting and colors and intros and exits, and then what to do with your show after, how to market it, how to chop it up into tiny little pieces that you can use all over the web. There's a lot to think about. We are creating an education center where we are jam-packing it full of all of the things that we have learned over the years about how to create a successful video podcast from A to Z. If that's something that you're interested in, if you're interested in creating your own podcast and making it awesome, you're going to want to pre-register below, and you will know the second that it's ready to rock and roll, and you can get rolling on all of your awesome video podcasts. Now, if you're watching this and you're going, that seems like a lot, it's because it is. There's so much that goes into this, but that's why we created Video Podcast Producers, so we can do it for you. All you have to worry about is showing up with your guest and giving a great interview. So you obviously already know you need to create an awesome video podcast. So reach out to us so we can help you create it to its most amazing extent. You'll also get access to the Education Center, so you'll know what to do with your video podcast once we've created them for you. Thanks again for watching. Now go start getting all your planning together for your video podcast. What are you waiting for?